Folks, we're early into the NHL season, but we might already get a blockbuster trade coming here soon. Hello guys, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about a fascinating rumor coming up recently, linking the Buffalo Sabres and the Calgary Flames with a huge trade. We're going to be bringing up some of the recent reports by Frank Seravalli, some of the conversations between Buffalo and Calgary Twitter, and what could potentially lead to a massive trade this year. So make sure you watch till the end because we're going to be covering every bit of this trade rumor here, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more trade content just like this as we lead up to the trade deadline this season. Now, this whole situation kind of started when Joe Marino of the Charging Buffalo tweeted out this, saying that Dylan Cozens is going to look real nice in a Calgary Flames jersey when Adams trades him for Rasmus Andersson. But this wave of frustration against Cozens has come after a horrid start for him. Both him and Jack Quinn, two incredibly important young players on this Sabres team, seem to have taken steps back. As Aaron says, Dylan Cozens has to be the softest 6'3" skater in the league. And then he goes on to say he's still making the same mistakes he did 2 to 3 years ago with the puck that used to make you go, oh, that's just 19-year-old kid stuff. He'll be so good when he gets better than that. Maybe he learns how to use his physicality later on, but he is a hard watch when he's under pressure. And that's very indicative of what we've seen out of Cozens so far. Watching Buffalo and their weird performance to start out the season, there has been some good expected goals numbers, and there's been good players here and there. Peterka has looked fantastic. That bottom six in the cases of Ryan McLeod especially have been great. If you look at what Dylan Cozens has done so far, and in 6 games, he had 1 assist for 1 point, and it looks as rough as he's ever looked. I mean, last year was a bit of a step back in his game, going from 31 goals, 68 points to 18 goals, 47 points. This year, I was expecting a rebound season out of him. I was expecting him to get back to at least that 60-point plateau, and now it seems like it would be a miracle if he were to reach that. This was supposed to be a big year in his development, and at making $7.1 million, getting that massive contract extension last year, you were hoping that Cozens would be able to turn the page, but right now, he looks lost as their second-line center and might not even be. Ryan McLeod definitely has outperformed him for that second-line center role. And now I'm seeing Sabres fans out there saying that they'd be fine with Cozens being shipped off for free, and that they might not even be able to get rid of his contract without giving up something, which I disagree with considering his age and the potential we've still seen in him, but it just shows how bad he has been so far and how invisible he's become. And now that leads us on to the Calgary Flames side of this situation, because we had Frank Seravalli just yesterday talking about the Flames already being active in the trade market. He goes on to say early season trades are rare, but the Flames, one of the best stories to start out the year, are looking to add another center to the mix. And we get this perfect summarization tweet by Robert Munich saying that Frank Seravalli reports the Flames are in the market for some help down the middle, but this is what's most important here. Cites that they are looking for a guy who fits the age range of the team and the franchise and is preferably a right shot. Now, what I'd assume by fits the right age range for the team is that for this current retool, rebuild, whatever you want to call it for Calgary, they want to bring somebody in for the center position that's young, that already has a proven NHL track record, and is going to be able to follow these guys once the player they acquire comes into the prime of their career. And what player and center could a team potentially be wanting to get rid of who is 23 years old with a proven NHL track record and is also a right shot? Well, Dylan Cozens is your man. There's not a lot of players that fit this description, but in terms of players that could actually be traded, I think Cozens might be the most likely guy to be heading to Calgary here. And it would be a pretty enormous shakeup, but I honestly think it might be best for Cozens' career. It feels like just the downward trajectory that he's had in Buffalo is just bad news. I think going to a new team with a change of scenery could be what's best for him. The natural tools, I think the physical tools that he does have and isn't using could be utilized with Calgary, especially down the middle there. They have a team that is looking fascinating for the future of how good they've started out. Cozens could be a part of keeping that momentum going. I think there's still a 60, 70-point player in there. I think a lot of it is mental, and I think a lot of it is just the situation around him. And Buffalo just isn't looking like a fit, just a year away from his contract extension being signed. But I think it can be a good deal if he gets back to that 2023 type of level like a lot of Buffalo Sabres need to do. In Cozens' case, though, I think Calgary could be a pretty perfect fit for him. And it's exactly the type of player I want to see Calgary trading for. I want to see them get younger. I want to see them get substantially more skilled, and Cozens ticks all of those boxes. I think especially if they're looking to retool here, if they're looking to really change up that roster, getting as young as possible is important, and Cozens, still at 23 years old, does fit that. But now that leads us to what a potential Cozens to Calgary trade could look like. What could be going back to the Buffalo Sabres? Well, as we mentioned before, I think Rasmus Andersson will be a pretty natural fit. Calgary is looking for this young right shot centerman. Cozens ticks that box. Buffalo, I think, is especially looking for some reinforcements on that defense and looking for a right D. And Rasmus Andersson, once again, checks that box. I think as well for Buffalo, they're one of the teams out there that really benefits from that extra year on Andersson's contract. Not just making $4.5 million for this year, but also for next season. It substantially increases the value, but I think for a team like Buffalo, it's worth it. I think the Sabres are less likely to make these rental type additions. I mean, we've seen that in Buffalo's trading track record. They want to go after guys that have some term, and Andersson at least has a little bit of that. But we've already talked about Andersson twice on the channel to start out this season. That is how good his start has been for Calgary this year. In 4 games, he has 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points, and is playing some of the best defensive hockey of his freaking life. It makes sense. He's right in the prime of his career, turning 28 years old this October, but he's somebody that has controlled play. He's somebody that has been fantastic in those opportunistic moments for Calgary and is raising his value so much for the Flames. Just taking a look at the 5-on-5 stats so far with Andersson, he by far is having his best offensive season right now with a 3.25 expected goals for per 60 this season, way above anything else. His highest since then was back in 2022, getting a 3.05 rate, but his offense has been clicking, and especially with how good he can be on the power play as well, Andersson is going to be a hot commodity. No pun intended. But honestly, in an Andersson trade, one of my few stipulations that I think Calgary would have had is acquiring a young forward. I think that is something that they're looking to add on to this group. They're looking to add some beef. And I think in Cozens' case, he's exactly what the Flames want. He's exactly what they need. He's exactly what they've been trying to acquire. And I think getting him in an Andersson trade would be pretty perfect. I do think because of how both of these guys' values are trending, you might actually have to give up more if you're Buffalo because of just how rough Cozens has been. But if this is something that maybe waits until the trade deadline and we see Cozens get a little bit better throughout the season, then maybe perhaps it's a 1-for-1 type of trade. But I think considering how high Andersson's value is, considering how good he has consistently been, I think it might have to be Buffalo that gives something more. Now, I will say, looking at the defense, you could obviously see Buffalo could stand to use another top pairing, top 4 right shot D. Henry Jokiharju, I love him, but he's just not that guy. But let's say you add another type of puck mover in Andersson's case, and you could potentially have Dahlin, Andersson, Byram, Power as your top 4. I mean, the other team would never have the puck when those guys are on. When it's Samuelson and Clifton, that might be a different story, but still, when your top 4 is that good, it's less of a problem. And so far, with how good Andersson has been defensively at 5-on-5, I don't think it's going to be this pure offensive type of move. I think Andersson can provide some defensive value when he is at his best, and that's what we're seeing so far this season. So it wouldn't be just a pure puck-moving type D move. I think he could provide some defensive structure for the Sabres team that they desperately need. It's not going to be a Tanev type level, but it might be an improvement, especially over Jokiharju. The only problem for the Sabres is that if they don't get a center back, their center situation is weird, to say the least. Ryan McLeod would definitely come up as that second line center, and with how he's performed, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but I do kind of worry about how that third line center spot would shake out, because I think in the future, the Sabres are going to be just fine. They got players that can play center, like Noah Osterlund and Konsta Hellenius and Anton Wahlberg. They got a lot of good centers in the prospect pool, but right now, those guys aren't ready. So there might be a situation where it's McLeod as the second line center. Maybe you put Yuri Kulich as the third line center or something, but I think he's more likely going to be a winger in the NHL. And I think that's where his offensive value is really going to come from. So I don't know for Buffalo if there's a way out there unless they trade for a center from Calgary. If I'm Buffalo, I'm definitely targeting Martin Pospisil, who has been a really underrated physical centerman over the last couple of years. You can see last year took a bit of a step up in his play, getting 24 points, 8 goals in 63 games. This year, he started out brilliantly, and so far in 4 games is 4 assists for 5 points. He's been a big part of Calgary's great starts, and he's somebody I think that would be perfect for Buffalo, but I just don't see Calgary wanting to get rid of, especially when we look at the ages there, 24 years old. He's somebody that also, like Cozens, fits the age range for that Flames team, and I don't think it's somebody that the Flames are going to want to get rid of. But that's the problem, is that you really, the only other options are a Nazem Kadri, which I just think is too much for the deal, and Mikael Backlund, who's their captain. I don't think the Flames are going to get rid of him anytime soon, even though he would be pretty much the perfect player for Buffalo. So it's kind of going to be a weird spot where for Buffalo, you'd be increasing and getting better on defense, but their center situation I think would take a pretty major hit. But that's just the thing, even with Cozens starting with this piss poor performance, not a lot of the rest of the Buffalo Sabres have been up to snuff so far, and I thought we were going to see a major shift with Lindy Ruff's systems. At least when he starts out with a new team, he seems to get the most out of the young offensive players, but we just haven't really seen that so far, besides some cases like JJ Peterka. And in Cozens' case, if you get rid of him, that's going to make the center situation even less ideal, and the offense even worse. Maybe it makes the defensive side a lot better, but you have to give to get. And it really does suck for Buffalo, because if this was the same situation a year ahead of time, when players like Hellenius or Oslin especially could be knocking on the door as centermen, then I would say go right ahead. You could give those type of guys the spot, but it is just a weird situation here that Buffalo would have to figure out, and I'm not sure if it's going to be able to work out for them. I will say this, I do think it could be the perfect trade if Buffalo is able to get both Andersson and Pospisil from Calgary. I think that is the main criteria here for me. That might mean that Buffalo has to give up more than just a third or a second round pick back. They might have to give up a first and maybe a prospect on top of Cozens to make the deal work. But honestly, with how critical that center situation is for Buffalo to figure out, especially if they are going to trade Cozens, it might be worth it to bring in a player like Pospisil. I mean, now is the time to be winning. If you're Buffalo, you have to start turning a page eventually, and they need to start getting it done. And guys like Andersson and Pospisil, I think those two guys could be really underrated if they were to add them. The only thing really that you'd be taking much of a hit, at least right now with, if you're Buffalo, is the face-off percentages if you were to make this type of trade, because Pospisil is hovering around 42%, while Cozens is at 52%. So if that's something that Buffalo values, then maybe that's not the way they go. But I don't know, man. Even if they don't end up trading Cozens, I would still be very hell-bent on getting Andersson if I were Buffalo. He just feels like the perfect type of fit to rejuvenate that defense and bring some offense on top of it, at least if he's able to continue this type of play from the start of the season. If he is able to be that guy that changes that defense, turns that team around, then anything is worth it for the Sabres. I feel like most likely we won't see Cozens part of the deal just because of the cap hit and the complications there. But if he was, I think it could be pretty interesting. Heck, I mean, we've been talking about Cozens this whole time, but there's other younger centers on the Buffalo Sabres who Calgary would like to have potentially. I don't know how much is going to be improving in Peyton Krebs's game, but he's somebody that as a center has gotten better in the center position over the years and has somewhat become a solid defensive, physical player for Buffalo, though the offense just hasn't been able to translate consistently. Maybe he's able to change that though in Calgary with a new situation there. And you also have some of the center prospects coming up. Noah Oslin maybe would be the big part of an Andersson trade, perhaps the big piece going back. Who knows? But I think Buffalo doesn't have to trade Cozens to make an Andersson trade work at all. They have a lot of options here if they are to go that direction, but I think it is something that they should look into, because if they have another losing season, then I don't even know what to expect out of them going forward. They need to change course. They need to change trajectory, because it isn't looking good for another straight season. Though I will say this, there is no reason right now, I think, for Calgary to make this type of trade, considering the term in Andersson's deal and how well they're playing right now. I mean, they can kind of coast with the momentum and the value that Andersson has been able to build for himself. Maybe if Buffalo comes out with this crazy offer, they end up accepting it. But right now, everything is in Calgary's courts, and they have all of the momentum. They have all of the leverage in this type of deal. And if they're smart, I think they're going to end up capitalizing on it. I will say, though, even if they don't trade Andersson and they sign him long-term, that's exactly the type of player that I'd like to have on my team. He's somebody that has proven to be a pretty strong leader with the Flames already. He's somebody that loves to get dirty and grindy when he wants to as well, and he's not afraid to get up in people's business. He's somebody that is a great defenseman, though, has proved to be a great, consistent puck mover, and I think for the Flames, if you keep somebody like that, it's not the end of the world. You don't need to trade everybody in this retool, but I do think the Flames will likely make at least one more big deal, whether that's Andersson, whether that's Kadri, or maybe less likely a Mackenzie Weegar. I think the Flames still are in store for something else that's major, at least one more, and Andersson is probably the most likely. But I'd love to know down below, if it's, let's say, Andersson and Pospisil for Cozens and a first-round pick, maybe not for this year, but for next year, is that something that you take if you're Calgary? I mean, Buffalo hasn't been all too successful. So that first round pick could be pretty interesting. And Cozens, I still think, has potential as a second line center in the NHL. So it's going to be interesting. I think that trade could be beneficial for both sides. I could see a situation where it works out for one of them and not the other, but I think it could be a fascinating deal and something that I wanted to talk about. I mean, instantly when I saw this, I was like, I want to talk about this on the channel because this would be wild. One last note is that you will want to still consider the cap situations, but both of these teams have a relatively good amount of cap space. Buffalo has about 6 million, but they were to trade out Cozens, then that would obviously make it a lot easier. If they don't, then that's a situation where I don't think is going to be much of a problem considering Andersson's cap hit. Let's say it's Andersson for a first and a top prospect, then obviously that would still be able to fit under Buffalo's cap. So this is one of the rare situations where you don't really have to consider the cap too much in a potential mock trade. So really it makes it a lot more fun. But I would love to know your thoughts down below on this potential trade situation between Buffalo and Calgary. Are you on board? Do you think it is the perfect trade for both sides? Would you make any tweaks to my mock trade? Do you think there could be another player going back to Calgary, another player going back to Buffalo? What would your Andersson, Cozens, or even Andersson to Buffalo trade look like? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Give your mock trades to us down below. And of course, make sure you share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell if you guys haven't already for more hockey trade content just like this. And one last thing there is click on this card for all of my trade content if you guys want to binge that right through. I will see you guys in the next one for more hockey coverage, and I hope you have a fantastic hockey day. I'll see you guys in the next one though. Goodbye.